Larodar is a two-phase encounter, with bouts of hectic ad cleave, healing mechanics, and firefighting. The fight begins with Larodar summoning 3 fiery treants, indicated by the small orange circles on the ground. You want to priority cleave these down as soon as possible and interrupt their fiery flourish cast. Once they are killed, they will turn friendly and become charred treants. These charred treants start at low HP, and you want to heal them to full. Keep in mind they will take damage from all the other mechanics happening in the fight, and also that you can life grip/rescue them into a safer place. Once these treants are healed to full, they transform into renewed treants and will walk towards the Seed of Life in the center of the room, and begin channeling Nature's Gift, giving the seed energy until they die. More on that later. While this is happening, Larodar himself has a slew of mechanics, the first of which is Blazing Thorns. This will create 2 spiral star patterns of swirlies to move out of. These will, in turn, spawn blazing coalescence orbs that move slowly towards the boss. If they reach him, they will give him a stacking 20% fire damage done buff for 10 seconds. And since this boss has a bunch of fire damage, this would be bad. Instead, if a player soaks an orb, it will deal a significant chunk of damage to them and apply a debuff that increases their critical strike chance by 20%, as well as applying a dot for 10 seconds. He will also cast Scorching Roots, which will create untargetable roots that will fixate on a player and move towards them. If you come into contact with them, they will apply a dispellable nasty dot and root you for 10 seconds. If they come into contact with the player they are fixated on, they will fixate a new player. You will need to use the Seed of Life on these roots to make them killable, which is important to surviving this phase. The Seed of Life is the main mechanic of this phase. You may have noticed that there is a lot of fire on the ground around the arena. There are also mechanics in this fight which will create more fire on the ground. This is where the Seed of Life comes into play. Once the Seed of Life is charged with energy from treants, a player can click it. A large green circle will appear and you will begin spewing emerald magic from where your character is facing. This emerald magic will douse any fire pools on the ground, as well as exposing any scorching roots, and the Seed of Life will begin to be rapidly drained of energy. You can click the seed at any percentage of energy, but in testing we waited for around 40%. Also, in the latest heroic testing, I was able to activate the seed by myself, even though the dungeon journal indicates that you need 3 players. You want to do your best to identify where the scorching roots currently are and breathe on them first. Then you want to make your way around the room in a clockwise manner, dousing as many fire pools as you can. Prioritize any fire pools that are in the middle of the room first, as these will cause the most issues later on. Once the seed is exhausted down to 0 energy, the player who clicked the seed will gain a 4-minute debuff, preventing them from using it again. I want to touch on the scorching roots I mentioned earlier. Once you kill the exposed roots, their behavior mirrors the treants, and they will transform into charred brambles, which are friendly and healable. You need to heal these up to full before Larodar reaches full energy and casts Raging Inferno. The renewed bramble barrier, which is created from fully healing the brambles, will reduce damage taken from Raging Inferno by 90%. I want to note, however, that you don't have to stand behind the brambles, just in the green circle area indicated. Larodar's tank mechanic for this phase is Furious Charge. He will focus on his current threat target for a few seconds and then charge to the location, dealing huge drop-off damage, leaving fire puddles behind him as he charges, and then apply a debuff that makes that tank take 100% increased physical damage for 20 seconds. The goal of Phase 1 is to preserve as much space as possible with good Seed of Life usage before he casts Raging Inferno 3 times, and then he'll cast Consuming Flame, signaling the start of the intermission. Consuming Flame does massive raid-wide damage, as well as pulls you towards Larodar. If you are within 3 yards of him, you will take Giga bonus damage. After the channel ends, Phase 2 begins. Phase 2 has a completely different set of abilities. The goal of this phase is to kill the boss before the fire engulfs the room. You will no longer have access to the Seed of Life, leaving you with no way to remove any fire. First and foremost, his tank mechanic is changed to Smoldering Backdraft. This is a funnel cone that deals huge damage and then applies Smoldering Suffocation, which prevents all healing taken and deals damage over time. In addition, this debuff causes the player to leech health from all nearby allies within 6 yards. They will need to stack into melee to prevent dying. Larodar will spawn 3 soak circles at ranged with Falling Embers. Only one player needs to soak these at a time, and if one of these isn't soaked, it will deal a large amount of raid damage and give the boss a stack of Searing Ash. Ashen Call will spawn a circle of ashen treants at the edge of the room that will walk towards the middle. They have threat tables and will leave behind burning ground patches as well as swirlies you need to dodge when they are killed. These are fully crowd controllable, and on the PTR it was full duration CCs, so if these end up being a problem, you could root them if need be. Flashfire will apply an 8-second debuff to random players, and it has two components. A healing absorb that needs to be healed off before it expires, otherwise the player will be stunned for 10 seconds, and AoE raid damage that will be dealt and requires those players to move away from the raid. It does seem like you could immune this if necessary. Finally, Fire Whirl will spawn 3 fire tornadoes near Larodar that orbit quickly around him. If you get hit, you'll take some fire damage and be knocked back. That about sums up the fight on Heroic. On Mythic, there are a decent amount of changes. First and foremost, in Phase 1, there's a new ability called Igniting Growth. This will cause all players to spawn burning ground underneath them for 15 seconds. The catch is, if you are next to already existing burning ground, then the patches you create are significantly smaller. You want to try to pre-position towards the edge of the fire in the room and drop your puddles there. Soaking the orbs from Blazing Thorns now applies a permanent debuff, increasing the damage you take from the orbs by 250%. This is to discourage having the same players soak the orbs over and over again. And you now need 3 players to do the Seed of Life. This is subject to change, but on the PTR there were 3 different positions you could get, and it seemed semi-random on how it chose which players got what. When these 3 players click it, on the PTR it was choosing the 2 closest players to the seed after the first player clicked it, they become linked together. One player becomes the firefighter like before, one player sees a stationary green circle around the seed, and the last one links to those 2 players together. Each of these players will see a different green circle radius, and they need to stay within it, or the link between them will snap. They will need to move together and put out the fires as well as exposing the roots. There's a new ability called Ashen Devastation. This will debuff 4 players for 8 seconds, and when it expires, it will deal huge drop-off damage to the raid. You want to move as far out as you can, which becomes more difficult as the room starts to close in due to the Ashen Treants and the fire on the ground. The last change is the tank mechanic in P2, Smoldering Suffocation. It will also now apply a debuff which makes the target take more damage from it, further increasing the amount of players needed to leech from. The TLDR for this fight is as follows. In P1, have pre-assigned players responsible for the Seed of Life, kill fiery treants and then heal up charred treants, use the Seed of Life to expose scorching roots and put out fire, kill scorching roots and then heal up charred brambles before boss reaches 100 energy, bring Furious Charge away from the raid, soak Blazing Coalescence, and stand in Renewed Bramble Barrier when Raging Inferno is cast. In the intermission, don't be under the boss, and in P2, soak Falling Embers, move away from other players with Flash Fire, dodge Fire Whirl, face the boss away from the raid when Smoldering Backdraft is cast, and crowd control / kill Ashen Treants. On Mythic, stand near existing fire when Igniting Growth is cast, and move to the edge of the room with Ashen Devastation. As always, thank you for watching, and if you want to learn how to defeat the next boss, Naimu, then make sure to tune into the next video.